All right, so in general, I can't really see any of the servers or anything. So if you have questions, you can kind of toss them in workshops, but also kind of feel free to just speak up and ask any questions that you might come across. But this is definitely going to be much more casual than than a full workshop or anything. I'm just going to basically be going through some issues for near DBT that we're working on, and follow up to Shushin's workshop. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to just listen along and see how it goes. So just kind of for some context. So previously, if we go over to closed ones, I went through the actions. So in looking at, like what is a transaction on near, we found basically that there is this big old object here that is just kind of contains all of the raw transaction data. That same type of information if you were to look at it in the actual Near Explorer. That's who the signed by, where it was going to, all these different metrics like the transaction fee. Was there any actual near sent from one account to the other? All of this is contained in this big old object. And in there, the first thing that we kind of came across was that there's this big, this actions block. And it could be function call, or it could be add key, it could just be a transfer, and it could be just one, or it could be 30, 40, or 50 different actions all kind of chained together that make up this transaction. So we went through and kind of talked about how we wanted to split all that out. And that's what led to this actions events table here. Basically, we went through that transaction table, kind of pulled out relevant information for it, including the action name. And then we're left with this object that, for the most part, follows the same structure depending on which action it is. But we can't really parse this actions events table down any further. We can't say we want more columns for arguments, because if it's actually add key, that doesn't exist in here. So in just trying to figure out the best way to go about that, I figure just kind of splitting out into different tables for now is the best move. So that kind of led to this next open issue, action function call, that basically went through actions events and only pulled out where action event equals function call, and then we're able to kind of pull out what method are they using, what are the arguments for that, and these are the four different items in the JSON for function call. So this table kind of was built basically going down through that investigative method, just figuring out what step by step. Well, what do we need to do next? So now I figure what I'll do is, of these actions, we've identified that there are 7. There's actually 8, but we didn't have any examples of it. I think Drake commented somewhere. So function calls, not done, but for the most part, it's kind of late stage right now. It wouldn't make much sense. We have some working on transfer. So I'm going to pick one of these next ones and basically just kind of go through the process of curating one of the tables for this. And at this stage, we don't know if this will end up in a final table, if it's going to be the type of information that's going to be useful or not. But we're just got to kind of map it all out to figure out what we're working with near, so that we know kind of what their data looks like, how it interacts. So we'll go here. Figure out ones that are not function call. We have a lot of add key, delete account, create account. That's run on anytime you actually go make an account with Near. There's not going to be any actual action data for it, so that wouldn't be a good one for here. Transfer, we said we're working on. There's a lot of add keys, so let's go with that one. and just see what it looks like. So we have an access key with nonce permission, and then some sort of a public key. What I like to personally do is then kind of compare what this is with the actual Explorer and see, can we actually, see how this comes up? Like, how is the data? New key added for Maria, ed 255, ed 2559. So that looks like that right there. That slug is the public key added for Maureen.near. That's about it for this transaction. So at this point, I don't know, what someone using these tables would actually use how much they would actually need this add key item. But for now, we're just going to kind of pull it into a table. If it never leaves dev, that's fine. But just it's there, it's information. If someone ends up needing it, we have it curated and ready to go. But as part of the difficulty of doing this is I don't really know near. So it's kind of figuring out as we go. So it looks like this first one only had access key and then a public key with some stuff in there. And then there's access key and public key, but there's some more nonce permission full access, I see. So if it's not full access, you're allowing something. Okay, so what this is, from going through near, basically kind of same thing on Ethereum. If you go on Uniswap to make a trade, you actually have to approve Uniswap using your USDC or something. That's what this is for full access. You can kind of say it can have like unlimited permission to use a certain token in your wallet, or here, I guess, so berryclub.ek.near, I think that's going to be what they were interacting with, maybe. Okay, so shinjuwei.near, added access key for this, with permission to call any methods. Then probably want to set it up similar to how we would set up function call. So kind of first step is, define what we think the criteria would look like. Or schema, rather. So definitely want to keep action ID, block timestamp. Okay, so then access key is going to be, it's kind of high level. Which one had? Permissions, what's important here, because that's going to be either full access, or is it always going to be a function call? Some sort of allowance. Receiver ID is important. So I'm going to expand that. And then if you're familiar with like Python and dictionaries, you can kind of index into these very much in the same way. So then we want to see. What I'm curious about now is method names. That's because there's action date, action permission. Oh. Okay, so if it's full access, it's going to be null. but it's not always empty. So sometimes it's going to be add request, add confirm. Access key added for this with permission to call any of those 4 methods there. Whereas if it's not listed, call any methods. Does that look any different if they chose full access instead? With permission full access. So when it's not full, it's limited to, I think they use base 18, so cut off 18 of those zeros. That much near. But for any method on app.nearcloud.near, so the function called allowance method is allowance method names receiver ID. So then there's 2 competing structures here for either full access or if it's not full access, it's going to have this function call within there. So then now we're figuring out, okay, we have to kind of account for that. So just kind of building out, we want to keep action ID. We don't need action name because we know that's going to stay. Keep action data for now. So nonce is always there. And then if you remember from Shushin's workshop, whenever you're parsing JSON, you always want to explicitly cast what variable type, what data type you're looking at here. Otherwise, it's going to assume it's still just an object. And if it's text, it's versus a number, you're not necessarily going to get the outcome that you want there. Public key is there. Public key, kind of no matter what, public key is going to be there. So we'll keep with the easy ones for now. So now we probably want to do one of 2 things. Either just keep the permission and just have it say full access, or have it end up being kind of this whole function call underneath. For now, I'll just pull it out like that. See what it looks like. That's That's because public key is not within access key. So now what I'm just thinking through is, do we want to, I mean, we want to keep all of the add keys together in one table, but do we want a table where, when permission is full access, everything else is null, and then unpack basically the permission where it's not full access and have columns for allowance, method names, and receiver ID. Um, I think yes, I think that's fine. And then what I would do um, is, post that on GitHub for someone else to take a look at and, offer their thoughts of maybe we don't want, 3 columns where half of them are just null values. I don't have thoughts on that, how they would do it. And then I'm just going to very incorrectly copy. And paste a bunch of stuff. So then when it's, I want to then probably change this one around because we don't want it to just be the JSON that we just pulled out over here. So allowance is going to be a float. That's going to stay as an object, but sometimes it's going to be null. So I wonder how we want to. Yeah, I didn't think so. I'm not going to cast that yet because I don't know what I should send, what data type I should pick for it. Okay. I guess it is still an object. So permission. Yeah, I don't know what I would want to put there when it's not full access. So let's make an issue on GitHub so we can have some conversation about it. All right. So we're starting a conversation on it. And then in the meantime, I'll at least start with the DBT model for it. So I use Atom. You can use DBT Cloud, you can use VS Code, but personally, I myself like using Atom. Add key. So you need your ginger brackets for your config block. It's going to be action ID. So I'll leave that for now. So then part of our structure when we use DBT is use CTEs kind of at the start, almost as if you're importing dependencies. So for the first one here, you're taking from the actions events tables. So I'm just going to bring in the full actions events.sql model which is over here, which matches up with here. What we're doing right now is acting on the actions events table. And then we obviously don't need all of them. Action name. Add key. So then, it's going to be very similar to the SQL that we wrote just kind of in Snowflake when we were exploring. So we want the action ID, transaction hash, block timestamp. This won't make it into a final model. We would, later, delete that column. But kind of when things are in dev, you have a little more purview to go through and leave something in there because you can rebuild it later before it makes it into the production environment. We only have one right now. So kind of consider like a working environment, really.
Oh, better late than never.
What's
Thanks,
going on?
Jerry.
Yeah, of course. Yes, then like I said, still things to definitely figure out with like how we want to actually approach. These three columns here. When there are two different structures here, is it okay to have null values when it's full access, or frankly, it's not all that. It's not like it's super deep JSON objects. It's not. It's only ever going to be a function call with allowance method names and receiver ID. So the final decision might be just leave it as either full access or as this item right here instead of doing this. Because just having a bunch of records that are null might not actually end up being all that useful. It does kind of end up helping certain users if they want to maybe filter by receiver ID if they only want. But it looks like there's actually pretty good variety in there. Most of them are, if it's not null, as app.near crowd.near, which I'm seeing a lot of. So I think, and that's going to be a, let's see, a system address. Yeah, for sure. With 13 million and an even amount of inbound as outbound. So it's just things are just kind of passing through it. But certainly could be useful. Add key that we're looking at here is basically, as far as I understand, approvals on Ethereum or another EVM chain. So I could definitely see that being useful. But it would be, I wonder how someone might pull out like who the receiver ID is when it's full access and that's not included in there. Can we do that from the transactions table? I don't know. And that is part of the difficulties of curating data that's new and complex, is that not, I don't know exactly how the end user might use some of this. So that's kind of why we have to go for cast a wider net, and go through kind of curating everything almost at first, and then honing it from there. Kind of go out then come back in. So for now, for a test table, I'm going to keep those in there. So we've got action events, only where to add key. Then we have all of our data here. And I'm just going to see make DBT. So this models, actions, events, add key, I'm telling it only run this one. We don't need to run any of the other ones here because they're not important to me right now. We'll refresh them at a later date, but I'm just focusing on this one. It'll go quicker. Because it already does take a little bit anyway. Cool. So now if I hit refresh here, we have a new table, add actions, events, add key. And now we have the same exact thing that we just built out here when we were just kind of exploring the data. We can kind of leave Snowflake, go over to our actual editor, and build it into a DBT model, and we end up with the same exact thing here. So definitely, by no means is this a final table, because we do have to figure out, how do we want to address kind of these tables over here, and that's why we use the GitHub issues for conversation. It's very collaborative thing, kind of building these data models, because one, I think everyone has a little bit different idea on what the right way to do something is, and two, there's probably another way to do it that I'm not thinking of, or maybe there's something in here that makes sense to pull that out in its entirety, or someone might say having those null values in there is just inefficient. It's easy enough to go through and just kind of index in. If you want to search on receiver ID, it's always going to be in in this same location in the JSON object. So pulling it out here is not necessary, that type of thing. And then in the final table, I would also delete this action data. I'm just keeping that in here. So for me, it's easier to be able to just quickly go back and see what we're actually pulling apart. When it becomes more of a final table, I would delete that. So when it's rebuilt, that's not there. But this, for now, for add key, that's as far as I can really go, because I have questions. I want to get some input from others. But there were several others action that we can go through. I actually don't remember what the action names were. So we've done action key. I separately did function call, which I think are going to be two of the most common ones, but let's find out. Like what's the most useful next? Function call, 200,000 of those in our sample, 23,000 add keys, 11,000 transfers, and then a very small amount of create account, delete key, delete account, and only 40 deploy contracts. And just a reminder, we are working with just test data here. This is by no means the full NEAR database, but we can just use this to infer, what are the most common actions out there. No surprise that function call is number one. That's almost everything that someone's doing on the chain is probably going to be a function call. But we could go through and take a look at creating and deleting accounts. That's kind of curious to me. Well, I don't know if that needs to be its own table. Action data is never going to actually have anything. Delete account, on the other hand, beneficiary ID. Why is this not? The NEAR Explorer doesn't want to work. What I'm trying to do is see how this transaction comes through on the NEAR Blockchain Explorer, so I can see, someone that's looking at it right now with the tools available, what is the Explorer pulling out? What is that displaying? And that's how I go through and kind of guide myself. What I look through is, how does it compare to what tools people are already using? Would an end user want to use it in a similar way? But it won't let me do that. However, it looks like action data is only ever going to be beneficiary ID, which I'm thinking might be the person that's deleting this account. And then maybe they transfer assets to the beneficiary, but I don't know because just try a whole new tab altogether. Well, NEAR Explorer is not working. So just going through, my thoughts on this are it doesn't make sense to curate a delete account table. Because there's not really anything that would be different from just applying an action name equals delete account filter, because there's no big JSON object to actually go through and parse here. It's just one item beneficiary ID. So we can make action events public facing, and it's incredibly easy to just filter on delete account for the end user. A curated table, it's certainly possible. We could just, I don't know, maybe go back, maybe higher up the chain of the transaction and pull in, some maybe more account level info, like what account's being deleted if it's not beneficiary ID. If I were able to look at the NEAR Explorer, that's something I might look at. But for now, I'm probably just going to leave this be.
Can I ask a question, or do you like to just go and then when?
No, please.
So I was just wondering about that. Wouldn't it just make sense to just flatten that and have it be, instead of action data, just have it be a beneficiary ID column, just in case that's used somewhere else on some other table somewhere. The beneficiary ID, because
It
that's really
certainly
the
could.
deal. Is that it's like a JSON that could just be, you know, a one variable with a single value instead of a, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah,
beneficiary
definitely.
ID is the only thing that you ever need out of that action data column. I mean, I don't know that you
Yeah,
need it. You might already know that you don't, but it just seems like,
I don't know, and that's part of the question is, going through. How often are people or are analysts querying, when an account's getting deleted, and is it necessary to have like a full table for that? Because and also that's it. Like, is this actions events table going to end up being, what's public facing, or if are we going to pull out each of the different actions into 7 different tables? In which case, yeah, it would make sense for delete to then just parse action data into the beneficiary ID. Um, but I'm just kind of working down the ladder really with, previously started with function call, went through add key earlier. Someone else is working on transfer. They're creating, deleting accounts, kind of just the next one up. I forget what the other ones were. Deploy contract. I think that one could be really interesting. I'm hoping. Okay, so it looks like it's all just a code item. And then we can use a Snowflake function called try base64 string, which will either decode this from base64 into something we can read, or return null if it's not possible to do that. None of them. Is the new Explorer working for anyone else? It was fine earlier.
No, it doesn't work.
Okay. I have a couple.
I can't believe you
Maybe
broke
near.
your Explorer, man.
Oh, it's all asymmetric now. Okay, so near scan's also broken. So I assume they pull from like the same source. Well, using the Explorer is not necessary. I just do that because, like I said, I like to kind of compare one from the other. And I was hoping to be able to see what this was, because a lot of times there are like separate encodings, as opposed to just kind of like standard base 64. So, kind of for example, function call, the very common one that I'm working through, which also isn't finished, so I could go through here. We can go through. So arguments is also base 64 encoded, so we can do and you can see from the before of this this nonsensical string, at least nonsensical to us, and then becomes this actual set of arguments that if we were able to open up the Explorer, it would show the same thing here. But there are certain ones. Where it's not able to. And then just if you're curious why, kind of before when I was going through this, basically went through, everywhere where args decoded was null, and just kind of pulled out, okay, so what contracts are they actually interacting with? Who's the signer on these transactions? And for just about all of them, they have to do with Aurora, which is the EVM scaling solution on top of Near. So there's some, Aurora, when you're interacting with that, adds some, separate encoding that isn't, that you don't, base 64 decode can't, actually can't decode that without, some additional help there. And I'm not sure how to decode that right now. So there's, a pretty significant amount of transactions here that'd be great if we could get the information on, kind of see what Aurora information is rolling up to Near. But right now, that's definitely a blocker in the data that, we just don't know how to actually translate that. So this other dev table right here is basically everything that, where decoded is not null, where it is not actually an Aurora related transaction. So far I know I've spent most of my time in Snowflake, but that's, probably pretty accurate because, you got to get a feel for the data before you know what to build. Frankly, for DBT, it's kind of, building the table models out is more one of the last things to do, because how do you know what information here is important enough to include in the table and what the structure of the table is going to look like without kind of going in and exploring the data. So for me, I do a lot of all that in Snowflake here. Shushin's workshop took us through DBT Cloud, and I will say candidly, I really liked starting in DBT Cloud. I could do, you could write the same thing. I think so. Kind of use the same SQL that I'm using in Snowflake over in the DBT Cloud IDE, and it was super helpful starting here because I didn't know DBT, and having certain things that like autocomplete for if I'm typing out a config block or running DBT down here, not knowing any of the commands. So my first month I only used DBT Cloud in here, and then kind of recently started actually using DBT on the command line and in Atom once I got more comfortable just with the overall structure of it. But the exploration part that I do here, you very much can do in DBT Cloud, and frankly, it might almost be easier to do it in Cloud because instead of writing that, I could use the source block that Shushin went through in her workshop, and that one was what? Actions events? Or was it singular action events? Actions events. And that's probably going to fail if I had to guess because it's not in the sources. So that's one other thing. So this source function really is what it is. Basically, it just tells DBT go look for a file, like the actual source file, and look for schema near, and then go pull from the actual table actions events. So if I don't add it here, you can see sources. We can pull chain walkers and anything from chain walkers because we've defined it in here. And then the benefit to that is that nothing's hard coded in, and you only have to update it in one place. So if you have 4 different models pulling from near blocks, you can just write, source near underscore blocks, and then maybe for some reason the name of it changes in Snowflake. You only have to change it here in the sources file. The sources function will actually go through and find that. I'm not good at YAML, so I'm just going to do this, which is probably not allowed. I am because I'm on main. But if I wanted to add a new source there, basically I just would need to give it a custom name. I would probably just name it near. Schema would be dev because that's where we are working here. The database is the near database, and then each table that I want to. You don't have to put all of them in. You only have to put the ones that you're going to call. So if I were just writing a new DBT model that I wanted to call actions events, I wouldn't, personally, waste my time adding stage transactions, stage blocks until they're needed, because it's not an active source in my mind. So any questions?
Yeah, I have a really dumb question.
All good. What's up?
I can't figure out how to log into DBT Cloud.
So have you made an account with them yet?
I think so. I mean, I can get the Snowflake and everything, and I think it's the same credentials, isn't it?
So you'll end up actually, putting your Snowflake credentials, into DBT Cloud, but it'll be a new account because DBT is like a separate company. So then for here, you'll end up, telling it, all right, I'm pulling from the metrics.github, GitHub, but then right here, connection. This is where your Snowflake credentials would go in so that it can actually read and write the data from the database. But this is a separate layer kind of on top and in between, if that makes sense. Anything else? Anyone lost or confused? Has this been helpful?
It's been really helpful for me just watching you in action,
Good.
seeing you
Yeah.
working and stuff like that. I mean, I had some other questions, but I'm also glad that a few people showed up, so that's cool too.
Yeah,
And I am able to log into the DBT Cloud, so I just need to make sure I got everything set up.
yeah.
I don't
So
think it's
then,
gonna be a
like,
problem now. Yeah. Cool.
okay, cool.
Go
Yeah,
on.
you gotta
Carry
remember
on.
exactly how you do it, but then you create a new project and then just kind of, make sure you connect the repository in Snowflake, and then once you're there, you can just go to develop, fresh,
Okay.
and
Cool.
then it let you work.
If I get stuck, there's plenty of people I can ask, so that's cool.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, hopefully it's helpful. I just kind of wanted to go through the process of, you know, exploring the data, figuring out what it actually looks like, how to parse it out, and then turning this what started as just let's select all from actions events where it's an add key, into pulling apart the data from this actual object here. How do we turn that into a table of its own? And at the end of the day, it is kind of just, it's not all too different. You're basically just feeding SQL to DBT, and DBT on the back end is running all sorts of create tables. It's parsing any of these Jinja blocks here. But this one hopefully was relatively straightforward enough, and for me at least, it helped move something forward with the near database, and made brought some questions up as to how do we want to actually go about the permissions object. Do we want do we want to pull it apart like that, or leave it just as is? All good conversation to have. And feel free hop in on GitHub if you just want to see other actions that are issues that are going on, what everything else what's everyone working on, kind of what's been done. That just all lives under issues. If you have any thoughts on something that could be added, it's open. Feel free to open a new issue or comment on anything. That's both for near. I don't personally do all too much in Harmony, but there's also plenty of activity going on over here. And I think Ant has done a pretty good job Anything that's labeled good first issue is one that Anton thinks would be, a pretty good one to tackle if it's something you haven't done before. So definitely take a look at those. Feel free to stay active in the curators channel if if there aren't any, if there aren't enough good first issues out there, or if you're just having any trouble on it. I think we're always willing and happy to help out.